On this episode of Narcissist Apocalypse, we talk with an abuse survivor named Alanis. And Alanis' chaotic upbringing normalized instability in her future relationships. It's a story of repetition, being seen, confusion, and learning to trust your gut. Welcome to Narcissist Apocalypse, everyone. I am Brandon Chadwick, and with me today we have Alanis. How are you?
I'm great, thank you.
Well, thank you for being here, and if you want to be a guest like Alanis is today, please do go to our website at narcissistapocalypse.com, click on the guest form button, fill out the form, fill it out, and press the submit button. Also, we have a support group at our website. We have Zoom meetings every Wednesday nights, Thursday afternoons, and Saturday nights, and you can sign up at narcissistapocalypse.com. And we also have a newsletter at narcissistapocalypse.com, very reflective, and you can get a free workbook for every new episode. All of that is at narcissistapocalypse.com. And there's a content warning for today as we do discuss physical abuse in this episode. And today we are going to hear Alanis' story, and it's not going to be done in the full traditional sense. It involves how Alanis felt in childhood and how she found that familiarity in two relationships as she got older. And growing up, Alanis lived with emotional instability that took a long time to fully make sense of what was going on. Her father was unavailable, unpredictable, and really quick to anger, and that really shaped what felt familiar to her, in the long run and when she started dating. So in adulthood, that familiarity really followed her into two abusive relationships, and many survivors or victims don't consciously walk into these situations noticing the same patterns. It just feels familiar, and the abuse hasn't really shown up yet. And for Alanis, this is what's happened. It was tough for her to recognize. And in her first relationship, the first one was more openly cruel. The second was harder to see while she was really inside it. It was confusing for her, and things were really slippery and easy to explain away. But both of these relationships pulled on the same thing, the feeling of being unseen, devalued, and just left in the background of everything. And I'm sure many of you out there will feel validated by Alanis' story today. So now I'm going to get out of my way and your way. Alanis, the floor is now yours.
I grew up in a really small town. I was raised on the water, but, there, as with a lot of positives, there were also some pretty intense negatives that happened. I have a really emotionally unavailable father, and it wasn't something I realized until 2 years ago when I started going to therapy. But he was pretty reserved. He was gone all day at work, and then when he came back, he would disappear into his shop where he would work on his airplane because he was building a float plane in our basement. And he would go down there and disappear or work on a project, and we would make bids for hanging out with him or just trying to connect with him. And he would be like, oh, I'm busy. And he would go down into his shop. He was really funny. He was quiet, but when he talked, everything he said was just hilarious. And he had this uncanny ability of making everyone in the room laugh. And when he wanted to be, he was the life of the party and very musically talented. But he was really quick to anger. And growing up with him, felt like my mom, my brother, and I were always walking on eggshells around him. And he played the victim card a lot. Something that I realized going into therapy too is he would often turn things back around onto him, and he would be the victim of these things he didn't need to be the victim of, I guess is the best way to put that. And he was also an alcoholic, and he would be drinking all day, and then he would start yelling at my mom. And then there would be some occasions where we would actually have to hide because he was slamming doors and yelling and getting really aggressive. So growing up with him was super emotionally tumultuous. And, you know, every time we went on a family trip, it was kind of like, oh, what's going to happen this time? Like, what's dad going to get pissed off at now? Like, who's he going to yell at now? And it wasn't hard to make a slight against him. It could be so much as the way you looked at him. It could be like a joking comment you made, and he would just milk it that entire time and just make you feel really bad about what you said, or like have, you know, those like classic rages. So it could be really scary. And he was never affectionate. And I remember this one day we both loved storms, and we were out on the porch and we were watching these giant waves crash onto the shore, and like lightning bolts and the sound of thunder, and it felt like the world was in chaos. And he put his arms around me and squeezed me really tight. And my first reaction was, what is this? This feels really weird. Like, I do not like this. And it took me a really long time to figure out why I felt that way, because you know, it's a dad embracing his daughter. But I realized it's because it never happened. I never got that affection from him ever. And then the one time I did, it was just too much. And so I didn't realize that when I began dating that I was actually seeking out these people who were really similar to my dad. And it's not like I consciously knew that's what I was doing. It's just like I was only comfortable and around these people who had those traits because they were familiar to me. So I went to college, and I was kind of a late bloomer in high school. I never dated. I had this weird thing where I would have a crush on a guy, and then I would find out that he actually liked me back, and then instantly the crush would go away, and I would start avoiding him because that felt really foreign and scary to me. And so I would avoid them like the plague. And I couldn't say why at the time. It was just like, oh, no, actually, I realized I really, I don't want that. And then I went on to college, and I didn't really date that much there. But I did grow up with this weird feeling that I felt like broken or damaged somehow. And so college, I was just kind of like feeling in the dark. I didn't know what I wanted to do. I was in this program that was, we call it a sausage fest, where it's just a bunch of dudes, and I was the only girl in the program, and it was super alienating. So I ended up switching to a fine arts degree where I felt more at home. But I just felt really lost in school.
So at this point, you don't fully have language for any of this yet. You just know that something feels off in you. And a lot of what felt normal growing up was distance and unpredictability and walking on eggshells. So from there, who's the first person that you ended up with here?
I met him in the music scene. I was playing with a band, and the leader of this band had a mutual friend, and he would come over and he would be doing sound stuff like, hooking up amps and making sure the levels were all right. And so I met him that way. And it was weird because it felt like he was really mysterious. Like, we had Snapchat at the time, and he would send me snaps, and they would all be like really, like, they would be really blurry, and he'd put some like weird filter on it, and it just felt like he was kind of this like mysterious person, which kind of gravitated me towards him. And we were talking, we were texting a lot and stuff like that, and I thought we would hang out occasionally and just meet up and walk around campus or something. But whenever we hung out, it was always him talking about how much he knew about this band and that band, and like it felt like it was constantly him showing off how much he knew about these obscure like local artists and just like in general just obscure artists. It felt forced. It didn't feel like it was like that's just who he was. It felt like it was this character he was playing. It felt like he was playing a character. Yeah. And so, but yeah, definitely hipster, not into the mainstream artists. Like, have you heard of this obscure band? And I'm like, no. And like, I felt like really kind of dumb when I hung out with him, because he would ask me like, oh, do you know this band? Or like, oh, you know this band, right? And I'd be like, no. And he would be like, you don't? I'm like, no, I don't. And it was just like, I don't know. He had this kind of this way of making me feel dumb for not knowing the same groups as him. But when I look back in hindsight, I think he felt intimidated because I was playing a lot and I'm a good, trying to be humble, but I am a good musician. And it's because I practiced a lot. And he would play and he was terrible. He had a terrible voice. He was not good at guitar. And he had a band that was terrible, and the only thing he could hold on to was his like extensive knowledge of bands that nobody ever heard of. Like he could just been pulling these like random anagrams out of his ass, and like no one would know the wiser. So yeah, it just felt like it was always a showcase of how much he knew and how little I didn't. But, I was like, okay, like, I think it's one of those things where he likes me and I think he's trying to show off, like, how much he knows. I'm just going to, like, push it under the rug. And so, this happened a while ago, so I'm talking about all the things that stood out to me. So after talking and hanging out for a little bit, he invited me to this house show. And where I live, where I went to school, there was a really vibrant house show scene. So people would be living in these houses and they would throw shows where they'd have like 3-4 bands on the lineup, and it would kind of serve as this college venue. And so he invited me to this house show, and this actually ended up being the house I would be living in like 6 months later. But I went there with my friend, and I get there and I'm under the impression that I'm there with him. Like, I'm the girl he invited to be hanging out with at the show. And, it was just kind of like unspoken. That's what it was. And so I get there with my friend and I see him and he's wearing this big fur coat and like these like yellow aviators where his like eyes are kind of clouded over, but you can still like make out a vague shape, and just like classic him. And he's with a girl. And I'm like, hey, how's it going? Like, good to see ya. And he's like, oh, yeah. And he, like, disappears to this girl, like, to the back of the house or something. And I look at my friend, and I'm like, what was that? Like, what the hell? She's like, he invited you to this. I was like, yeah, I know. And so he passes by me again, and I, like, I pull him aside. I'm like, dude, what are you doing? You invited me here. I thought it was under the context I would be here with you, like, hanging out with you. And I was like, wait, you're with this girl. He was like, oh, yeah, I don't know. And then he, like, disappeared again. And I looked at my friend. I was like, yeah, I'm out. We're, like, leaving. And all of a sudden, like, my phone is exploding with, like, snaps from him being like, where'd you go? Like, why did you leave? Like, are you going to come back? And I was just like, nah, have fun with your, like, chick. Like, I'm good. And then, the whole rest of that week, it was, like, these blurry snaps of him being like, can I take you out to lunch to make up for it? And I'm like, no, sorry, buddy. Like, get lost. Kindly. Thanks. And so I should have just left it at that. But fast forward a month later, and I think they call it, I don't know if it would be this in this context yet, because I hadn't actually been in an abusive relationship with him at that point, but it felt like hoovering, I think is the term, where he was trying to get back on my good side, and I acquiesced, and we were hanging out more, and then things started getting intimate, and he invited me to go out to a show with him at a bar in the local area, and I was like, yeah, sure. And we weren't official at that point, but we go to this house and meet up with his friends before we go to the show. And there's this girl on the porch as we approach, and we get up there, and he immediately like starts talking with her, engaging with her. They disappear into the house. I don't know where they went, and I'm talking to his other friend in the house, who's actually the leader of the band I'm in, and we're talking, but the whole time I'm like, hey, like, where did X number one go? Where did he go with that girl? And then they like reappear like, I don't know, like 8 minutes later, and he's like basically like ignoring me and kind of like flirting with this girl right in front of me. And then I'm like, okay, I think I'm just being crazy. Like, I'm not going to say anything. I don't want to be that girl who's like, why aren't you paying attention to me? But going back, I would have done something completely different. So I just let it slide under the rug, and we go to the venue, and he sees, like, within 5 minutes of being there, he sees there's another girl there who he knows. And so he goes up and he's talking with her for like 25 to 30 minutes, and I don't have anyone to talk to. I'm standing around like an idiot, like literally trying to like make conversation with anybody. And it just felt so, like, my gut feeling was like, this is wrong. This is so wrong. Something's really not right. Like, get out of the situation. And it was super anxiety inducing. And he was just like talking to this girl and not even paying any attention to me. So I went up to the bar. I ordered one last drink, and I closed out my tab, and I just start crying at the bar. And I text him, and I'm like, looks like, you know, you're more preoccupied with somebody else. I'm gonna leave. And then he comes over and he's like, no, I'm sorry. I didn't mean it like that. Like, I just know her from blah, blah, blah. I didn't mean it like that. Like, do you want to be my girlfriend? I was going to wait for you to meet my mom, but do you want to be my girlfriend? And like an idiot, I said yes. And so we started dating, and it was just rocky from the start. I mean, anytime we would go to a show together, he would disappear, and I wouldn't know where he would go. And that happened at venues, at house shows, or I would be with him and I would look over my shoulder and he would just be gone. And I would just get really upset. I would get super sad and like have this fight or flight response where I would just like not know what to do and just start crying in the middle of like a show happening. It was always really embarrassing because I felt really crazy and stupid. And I think one of the reasons why I didn't heed these red flags in the beginning is because I grew up thinking that I wasn't worth it. My mom would get into these arguments with my dad, fighting for me to go like soccer camp or horse camp or, jazz camp, like all these things that kids should just be able to do without a fight. Like my mom had to fight for that for me. And I would be up late at night listening to these arguments, her being like, well, she just wants to spend a weekend at camp. Like, why can't she just go to camp for a week? Like, why does this have to be a big deal? And my dad would get so angry, and he was, he made so much money. I mean, he's an aeronautical engineer, but he didn't want to spend any of it on any of us. Like, my mom was given $150 a week for groceries, supplies, like anything for the house. She was only given $150. And, this guy's making like $200,000 a year and over. So, it's not like I had my dad coming up to me and being like, you're not worth it. But that's the message that was sent to me, listening for years to their arguments with my dad not wanting to pay for anything for us. And so I think why I got into these relationships to begin with, because my self-esteem was so low at that point. I didn't think that I was really worth anyone's time, or that I wasn't worth people giving a shit about. And so that behavior from people was something that I deserved and already felt familiar. And so it just made it that much harder to leave these toxic relationships. So anyways, so we ended up moving in together, and, there's just like a lot of weird behaviors going on when we start living together. It just feels like he's really deceptive, and still like we hang out together and he'll just disappear somewhere. And when I try to bring it up, he just kind of like, oh, it's it's not a big deal, like don't worry about it, or just tries to make light of it. And at the time, my parents were going through a pretty bad divorce, and my dad just ghosted all of us after one Christmas. He just left, and we didn't know where he went. And that was really hard for me to take. And I would be crying to him, and at first he was comforting, but then it was still something that I would get upset about even like 6-7 months later. And he would see me crying. He's like, oh, you're not over that yet? He's like, just get over it. And I'd be like, I was like, my dad just disappeared. I can't just get over this. This was a process of grieving. And then just felt like he was so callous about all of that. My grandma, my dad's mom, knew I really loved words. Like, it was one of those things where you like tell a relative once that you like this one thing, and then for every Christmas thereafter, they give you that same thing. for Christmas. So I told her like one year, like, yeah, I like words. And so every Christmas I would get like a dictionary from her, a thesaurus, or like a book of like absurd words, like that kind of thing. I think I have like 26 of them or something. But after all this stuff went down and my dad just disappeared and ghosted all of us, I got this email from his mom that was like, oh, I found this really long word and it made me think of you. And it was a super long word with a bunch of, I don't know, there was just a bunch of letters in it. And the definition underneath it was worthless. And I got so upset. I was so sad. And I told my ex number one about it. And he was like, so? He was like, just forget about it. I don't know why it's such a big deal to you. And I was like, my grandma just passive aggressively called me worthless. And my dad's gone. Like, where's your empathy? It was so weird. And so things get pretty bad. He becomes really verbally abusive. We planned a trip to Europe together. And at this time, I had just met ex number two at a gig. Our band was playing on the lineup with his band. And I had seen his group, ex number two's band, play once before. But I didn't really notice him. He was one of those guys that could kind of blend easily into the background upon first meeting him. And we played the show together, and after my band played, he came up to me, ex number two, and he said, normally I'm in the back listening to music, but you're like, listening to you made me want to come to the front. And after that, this like little spark went off, and I thought to myself, I'm never going to forget this guy. Something's going to happen with this guy. I don't know what it is, but I have a feeling like I'm never going to forget this guy. And so ex number two and I began talking while I'm dating ex number one. And it's at first, harmless texts, just like band recommendations and him like coordinating shows for us to play, my band to play with his band. And so in the meantime, ex number one and I are planning this trip to Europe. And before we leave, I was invited to play on a song with ex number two's band. And I'm thinking a lot of ex number two while I'm dating ex number one. It feels like an escape for me because I'm having ex number one tell me that when I smile, I look like a horse, that I'm fat and I need to work out, which is crazy because I was really fit. And, like condescendingly, like patting my stomach and being like, you'll get there. And just really depreciating things like that. And so I was thinking about ex number two a lot as a way to escape from the abuse I was experiencing. And so we go to the show, and we have a flight reserved for a couple days later. And we get there. I get there first because I'm playing with the band, and so I want to set up my instrument. And my ex at the time walks in, and he looks pissed, like he's so angry. And I'm like, hey, what's up? And he's like, you didn't put me on the fucking guest list. And I'm like, well, it's not my band playing. And also, it's just a $5 cover. It's not a lot. You'd be supporting the band. He's like, I can't believe you didn't put me on the fucking guest list. And I'm like, okay, sorry. Like, it just kind of slipped my mind. And then, I end up apologizing. I'm sorry. Like, I didn't mean to not put you on. It wasn't like weird or anything. And he was still angry. And so we went to Europe together, and he was really mean to me the whole time. And he would get on me for little mistakes, not getting there at the right time to take the light rail or the train. And he would put it on me and be like, I can't believe you missed it. I'm like, dude, we both missed it. And it was just like, I would just start crying and be like, you're so mean to me. I was like, I don't know what happened. I just feel like you're being so cruel to me. And he was like, oh, I'm sorry. And I don't know what I'm doing. And I'm like, you're just being mean. You're being so mean. And it was like that the whole trip. And we get back, and he's even more verbally abusive and would gaslight me a lot. And he actually ended up physically hitting me one day, and he turned it around on me. He hit me, and I was like, I can't believe you just hit me. I was like, I just stood there stunned. And then I walked out and I went downstairs and I cried in my room. And then he would just get home really late a lot of the time, like 2 a.m. And I'd be like, where were you? And be like, what do you mean where was I? I was working. And I'd be like, okay. And, while this is happening, I'm still texting X2, and it feels really almost like flirting, but not enough for it to be like, oh, he's flirting with me. It just felt like it was right under the radar of like borderline, like just engaging familial text and flirting. And at this time, the ex number 2 was in a long distance relationship with this girl he'd been with for like 4 years. So I just feel like harmless texting at the time, and I was slowly trying to figure out how to get out of this relationship with this guy, ex number 1. It was my first relationship. I didn't know how to leave. I was afraid what would happen if I did. And honestly, at the time, I thought I was the crazy one. I thought I had the problem. I thought all the mean things he said to me, I deserved. But that's exactly what they want you to think. And, I didn't know any better. And I was already like pretty codependent at the time. And so he starts getting more distant, and I'm bringing these concerns to ex number 1, saying like, hey, feels like you're not really in this anymore. I just feel like you are really far away and it's hard to reach you. And he would come up with excuses, just like, oh, I was really hungry the other day and I got grumpy, or like, oh, I'm just really tired, like I'm just working a lot, stuff like that. And so he goes on a camping trip. He was like an event staff worker, so he would go to festivals and he would camp out there and also be helping like set up backstage for the musicians. So he went on one of these like camp work trips, and he was texting me one night and then just like went off the grid, and I couldn't reach him for like 4 days. And I was messaging him, I would call him, and there was nothing, and it was like really anxiety inducing for me. And I thought that he was, I don't know, maybe like hanging out with someone else. And he came back and he was so distant and callous and mean. And I kept saying like, hey, there's something wrong. Like, we have to talk. Like, you were totally off the grid for 4 days. And I know you had cell reception, but I think you turned it off. And like, I don't know what's going on. And he would gaslight me and totally be like, no, there's nothing wrong. Like, everything's fine. Sparks don't have to fly all the time. And so then he went on another work trip, but this time it was in California, and he went off the grid again. He just disappeared. And he asked me to move his car every 3 days so he wouldn't get a ticket. So I went upstairs to get his keys, return his room. And right next to the keys was a poem, and it was about a girl. And it was like this really badly written poem about like how great she was and how terrible I was. And it was so hard to read, and it was really traumatic. Just like reading something like that, even though, I mean, thank God the writing was terrible, but it was still really hard to read. And so I moved out in like that week, and he came back, and I had an empty room at that point, and we met up, and I was like, you are cruel and toxic, and I don't want to be in this anymore.
So ex number 1 leaves you feeling worthless, confused, and constantly on edge. And while all of that is happening, ex number 2 enters the picture here in a very different way. He notices you. He says the right thing at the right time. And given what you've already been living through, that really lands hard with you. So once ex number 1 is over, what starts to happen with ex number 2?
Ex number 2 and I were filming a music video for my band. And he was in the music video because the song we were doing a music video of, he was on that track. And so shooting this music video, and throughout the whole process, we're getting closer. And at this house I had moved to had a sauna. So after like shooting these video sessions, like the whole band, we would like hang out in my basement studio, and then we would all like get drunk in the sauna. And there was one night where, I had this like closet that you could crawl under, or it was like one of those open closets where you can hang clothes. There's no door, and it had like a little like cove on the other side of it. And we ended up like going underneath jackets and just like hanging out talking in that little like cove behind my jackets. And we almost kissed, and then his friend like crawled under and interrupted us. And it was just like for a couple weeks, it was just like us finding excuses to hang out. And I definitely felt like there were feelings there. And he would come with me to go to our mixing sessions for the songs. It just felt like we were always finding a reason to be around each other. And at this time, I feel like we're getting closer, and I feel really uncomfortable doing it when he has a girlfriend. And I'm just starting to feel really guilty and bad about getting close with him while he has a girlfriend of 4 years over in, somewhere far away. And so I tell him one night, I'm like, hey, like, I really enjoy hanging out with you, but there are definitely feelings here, and I don't think we should continue hanging out because I feel really bad, and I feel like it's disrespectful to your girlfriend, and I don't feel good doing this, but, I do really like you, and I hope to continue playing with you in the future. And he actually had plans that summer to go live with his girlfriend at the time where she was going to school. But after I told him this, it was like a week later, and he ended things with her, and he decided not to move to where she was, and we started dating. And it moved really quickly. It was kind of like a little off-putting to me how fast it felt like we were moving into things, because I had known him for like a year and a half, but not on that kind of level. And it just felt like it was just like moving too quickly. And he would say really flattering things, which I thought at the time were like really great, but it felt like they were kind of empty. And we had a party at my house. It was like a holiday party, and I invited a bunch of my friends over. And he was super standoffish with the friends. Like, I could just tell that he didn't like them, and because of that, my friends were like, what's up with him? And I was like, he's just going through a rough patch. He just got out of this 4-year thing, but I think he's okay. He's just, taking it day by day. And we're like, all right. And I thought in my head, I'm like, maybe I'm a rebound, but I convinced myself that it wasn't anything like that, because it already felt like he was out of the relationship, even when he had been in it with her. And so, things are pretty good for a bit. And then I think 3 or 4 weeks later, I go on family vacation with my mom and my brother. And while I'm there, he calls me, and he's like, just want to let you know, like, my ex is back in town and she wants to get coffee. And I was like, are you sure that's a good idea? I feel like it's way too soon, and I feel like you should probably have space from her, and I feel kind of weird about this. And he was just silent, and I was like, I don't feel comfortable with this at all. And then he was like, okay. And then the conversation ended there, and he ended up getting coffee with her, and then I didn't hear from him for like a week and a half until I got back. And we had been talking every day, and I was super confused. And so I got back, and I was like, can we talk? And he told me that he felt really confused, and that he still had feelings, and that he just couldn't do this anymore. And I was like, okay. And I felt like I was pretty understanding, but he seemed pretty upset. And then we had a gig together like a couple days later, and it was like he had flipped the switch, and he was like trying to get me back again, and staring a lot, like asking me what I was doing later, wanting, we ended up getting drinks at a bar afterwards, and he was like, can I go with you? And I was like, sure. And from then on out, it was like constant push and pull, where we'd be hanging out and be getting close, and then he would just like disappear. And it went on like that for a while, but I thought he was just in a funk. And like I would even say like, hey, I feel like we get close, and then you just like dip out, and I don't know where you go. And he would just say, oh, like I'm just in a hard spot right now, like I'll get out of it. But there were other things I was noticing, like when we'd hang out, we'd only talk about him. He would never ask me questions about me. it was always him talking like about, it was just always about him. All the conversations revolved around him, and it made me feel really small, but I already had a tendency to feel like I was small anyways. So that was something I couldn't quite put my finger on. And it felt like when we would get intimate, like things would be good for a little bit, and then he would all of a sudden stop looking at me, wouldn't engage in conversation with me, would disappear for a couple days, and then it would just kind of like repeat the cycle again. And I thought, every time, like, oh, like things are going to get better, he's just in a bad place right now. And then finally he ends up becoming the permanent member of my band. And probably not the best idea, but I really liked his playing, and he had already knew all our songs, and I really liked hanging out with him, even though I felt like I was being put on the back burner a lot. But yeah, we would end up getting close, and then I would think things would get serious, and then he would just back out and disappear. And whenever his ex came back into town, he would dip out. And it was also one of those things where he would play victim a lot. I would I would talk with him and bring up these concerns, and he would be like, it would always be about how he had a bad day, or how he was just, didn't know what was wrong with him, or there was something going on at work, or, it was always like me catering to him and his feelings and never considering mine. And so fast forward to it was about exactly a year ago, and we are going to go on tour. And we had been seeing each other again for like 3 months, but he didn't want to put a label on it. And I thought, oh, he just needs more time, like every other time before. And we're getting ready to go on tour for the first time, but before we leave, he was throwing a housewarming party. And at this point, I'm noticing that he has a lot of like female friends that are really attractive, that he will hang out with a lot. And I'm starting to notice that when we're together, there'll be times where he just won't look at me or engage with me or whatever, but he will be doing all that with one of his friends who's a girl. And I'm not the jealous type, but when somebody is shutting me out, but then not shutting somebody else out, it just doesn't quite add up. And so there's this girl that he works with, and he's like, oh, she's like a little sister to me. Like, she's a really good friend. We've been friends for a while. And I'm like, okay, like, yeah, that's fine. Like, I don't mind you having friends that are chicks. But he has this party, and he invites her, and she shows up with her boyfriend, and he's instantly like catering to them, showing them around his house, showing them all his music stuff in his room. And he's not leaving them alone. And it feels like they're just standing there in silence, and he's just like explaining about all his like musical gadgets and how they work and blah blah blah. And they're about to leave, and his coworkers and friends' boyfriend is in front. She's behind him, and he's next to her, and he's leading him out the door. And the boyfriend can't see this, but I can, because I'm behind all of them. He takes his lower hand and like gently like rubs her lower back, like super affectionately, and like looks at her longingly. And I'm seeing this from the back. The boyfriend doesn't see it because he's in front, and I'm like standing there. I'm like, what the heck is happening? And they end up leaving, and he ends up disappearing throughout. I don't know where he goes. It's like this theme of people disappearing. But I'm getting this like super terrible gut feeling throughout. And I'm like, that was so weird. Like, what was that? Like, what do you mean she's a little sister? It just felt like super intimate. And I was like, was that by design? Because the boyfriend couldn't see it, but I could. And it was like, was that a power move? It just felt so weird. So I decided not to bring it up. And we're getting ready for the tour, and he has a show the day before the tour, and normally I go to all his shows, but he does not invite me to this one. And normally he's always like, hey, are you going to come to my show, or are you going to go to this one? But this time he did not say anything about it to me. And in fact, it felt like he was avoiding the subject of the show. And so I decided not to go. But it was just like one of those things where I took note and I was like, that was weird. And we go on tour the next day. We leave for our tour. We went all the way down to like mid California and back up. And we had like, I think a total of like 8 shows. And it was super fun. But I just noticed that there was constant like him acting affectionate and then him pulling away, him acting affectionate, and then like not even talking to me the next day or looking at me. And if I would bring it up, I would get stonewalled. He would just ignore me. But it was like covert enough where I felt like I would second guess myself and be like, oh, I think I'm reading into it too much, or I think that maybe I'm just interpreting it wrong. Like it could all be so covert to the point where I thought maybe it's not the wrong way. I shouldn't be interpreting it the wrong way is, I guess, the best way to describe it.
So with him, it's less obvious, but it's still doing something to you. He pulls you in, then backs away. You bring something up, and somehow it comes back to him. And over time, you start feeling smaller and smaller, not just in the relationship, but even in your own band. So what happens after that?
I felt like people weren't really listening to my input. I kind of felt like, being the leader of the band, I didn't feel like a leader anymore. And in fact, I just felt like a groupie along for the ride. And I told this concern to him. I was like, yeah, I just feel like I just kind of feel a little bit invisible on this trip. And he was like, do you feel like, you're invisible to me? And I was like, yeah, a little bit. And he, the rest of that day, just wouldn't talk to me, wouldn't look at me, wouldn't really engage with me. He withhold affection. And I just felt like I couldn't bring it up because that would push him away further.
And that says a lot right there. You tell him that you feel invisible, and instead of moving toward you, he makes himself even harder to reach. So when you finally get back from tour, where does that leave the two of you?
When we got back, I was like, even despite that, I really still wanted to be with him because I was, in love with this guy. And I was like, okay, when we got back, I was like, this is kind of make it or break it. Do you want to date now or no? And he was like, oh, I can't do this. I need to get out of Seattle. I need to go somewhere else. I can't be here anymore. I need to leave. I just feel like I'm really stuck here. And it was like this complete 180 flip. And I just feel like there was always an excuse. I just feel like there was never ever any transparency, hey, I'm just not ready to do this, or hey, I like you but not enough for me to go forward with anything. There was never any conversation about that. It just felt like I was always a chase, and then once he had me, I was placed on this back burner and ignored until I pulled away, and it would repeat the same process again. And then his ex comes back into town, and I told him he was finally like, okay, I do want to date you. I don't want to stop seeing you. I do want to date. So we ended up becoming, an item. And he's like, okay, but I do want to try to establish a friendship with my ex. And, a big dummy, I was like, okay, sounds good. Yeah. As long as you try to be, friends and it doesn't go any further than that. And I said, but if you guys hang out, I want you to let me know. If you guys ever have plans to hang out when she's back, I would appreciate it if you would let me know so I can, mentally prepare for that. And so she came to town, and I was on vacation with my family, and every other day I was getting a text or a call being hey, she wants to get coffee. Hey, she's going to come do homework at my work. Hey, she wants to go for a walk. And it was just getting way too difficult. And I was like, you hanging out with her is hurting me. You doing this is very painful. And he was like, why? We're just hanging out. And I'm like, no. This is excruciating. If you care about me at all, you will take into consideration my feelings, and you will say hey, maybe we can find a time next week, or, it just was so frequent. And it was every day they were hanging out, and I wasn't seeing him at all. And he would just go off the radar when they would hang out. And about like a week before that, I had a conversation with him about the holidays and how they are really difficult for me, and how now if I was on vacation, I would appreciate it if he didn't disappear, if he would try to keep in regular contact with me like I would with him, because the holidays was when my dad left. And when I brought this up, he just got really quiet, and he was like, I really wanted to spend more time with my family over the holidays. And he like lives with his family. I was like, but you live with them. He's like, no, I really want to spend, be able to spend more time with them. And I was like, I'm so devastated. I was like, but I'm telling you that I need extra support in this time, and you're telling me you can't do that because you need to hang out with your parents who you live with. And he was like, well, you know what? The holidays are really difficult for me too. My dad went sober over the holidays when I was 8. Like, he became sober. And I was like, okay, did he leave? Sober is still, that's a great day. And it was just like one of these moments where I felt like I told him I needed support, and he turned it around on him, and he was the victim. And it just had no empathy for me or why I needed support. And so I was like, all right. And I was like crying, and I was really upset. And then he left for work, and he texted me. He's like, do you want to, go Christmas shopping with me? And I said, sure. And he picked me up, and he was telling me about how his coworker was really, this girl he works with was really upset. And so he put on the album I recommended it to him, and made her feel a lot better. And he really wanted to make her feel better. And I was like, seriously? Because what you said last night was devastating for me. And I didn't get any text from you throughout the day asking me if I was okay, or any ways for you to make me feel better. So it just felt like everyone else got this like empathy except for me. So anyways, so I'm on vacation, and he's disappearing. I don't hear from him for a while. When I do, he's like, how's it going? I'm like, good, how are you? And then he just doesn't respond. And it's just really shady and weird. And he keeps hanging out with his ex, and I'm not getting any affection or, anything from him. And I ended up ending things. And it was so interesting because when I ended things, we met up for drinks, I think 3 weeks later. And it was like he was a different person. He was like really engaging. He was asking me questions. He was like super interested in things I had to say. It was like now that I wasn't so close to him anymore, like there wasn't this like threat of intimacy. It was like he could be like, I don't know. It was like I was talking to a different person. And then fast forward, the pandemic happens, and we just occasionally call or text. And like 5 months later, during the corona, we decide to have another band rehearsal. And we start getting close again, and then we end up becoming intimate again. I think, oh, like he, has changed. Like, he's biking by my work. He's texting me. We're going on like romantic walks. He feels like he's really trying to get me to trust him again. And I'm like, okay, I think, it's been 5 months. Like, maybe something's changed. Like, maybe he's done some like reflection. Maybe he's over like the ex. And so I give it another chance. And then, like 4 weeks later, he starts doing like putting up the walls, not looking at me, even during rehearsals. And we carpooled one day, and after rehearsal, and I drop him off, or we're driving back to his house, and I'm like, hey, you want to get lunch? And he just doesn't respond. And I drop him off at his house, and I'm like, okay, have a good night. Like, and I'm expecting a kiss goodbye or something, and he's just, yeah, see ya. And 20 minutes later, he calls me. He's like, you want to get lunch? And I'm like, what? I just asked you that, and you ignored me. And he was like, oh, I don't know. I'm just like spacing out. Do you want to get lunch? And I was like, okay, sure. So we get lunch, and, still really distant. He's far away and not engaged. And we end up eating lunch at this lake. So we get our food and take it to the lake, and we're just eating it there. And he's like, oh yeah, I'm supposed to meet friends here, like in like a couple hours, 2 or 3 hours. They're going to meet me here, but we have a lot of time. And I was like, oh, okay. So we're just eating our sandwiches. And then one of his ex-girlfriend walks up to us with some of his other friends. And it's not like they're surprised to see us. They know that we're there. And they sit down directly across from us. And instantly he is engaged with his ex, like super, like flirting with her right in front of me. And it just like he snapped out of the funk and he was like super distant with me. But now he's like completely engaging with his ex sitting across from us. And it was just really weird. It was just super weird. And I was like, you were super distant with me and then you snapped out of it when she came. And I just felt, it just makes me feel like there's something wrong with me, or like, I don't know, like, and he was like, oh, I didn't know, they just stumbled into us. They didn't know that we were there. Like, they didn't know that we were there. They just happened to come across us because they got there early. And I'm like, this lake is huge. Like, there's no chance they just stumbled upon us. And he just straight up lied. So it kind of felt like I was used as like leverage to make him look better in front of her, or I don't know, but it was like my gut feeling was telling me to get out of there. And that's when I knew that actually nothing had changed. And as long as I didn't have boundaries, I would be pulled along in the same game that had been happening for a long time. And so after we played our show, I was like, I need space. And then last weekend I met up with him and I was like, I can't have any like relationship with you outside of the band. I was like, it's really toxic and I feel like you play mind games with me and you put up walls. And he was like, yeah, I have a serious problem. He's like, I've been recently noticing this. He's like, I think I have a huge problem. And I was like, yeah. And I mean, it's just like gaslighting, stonewall, and passive aggressive, and so many times where there was just like no empathy for me or my situation, and could never get close. A lot of like superficial relationships and a constant collection of women that he rotates through for validation and admiration. And he says that they're just friends, but it just doesn't feel, it just feels weird. And yeah.
So I know this is very fresh and new, but how's the healing process been and what have you been focusing on?
I am pretty sad. I feel like I officially closed the door because I know if I left it open, he would jump on that chance to play the same games again. And I feel like I kind of closed it for good, or at least I hope I did. And just, we have a lot of mutual friends, and I'm just kind of worried about, I guess, what he's going to say to them, because I'm afraid he's going to twist what happened or turn around to make him sound like the victim, which he's really good at doing. So, yeah, I guess I'm just trying to take it day by day and not think about it too much.
And if you had any words of wisdom for everyone listening, what would they be?
Trust your gut, for sure. Little voice that's saying get out or something's not quite right, listening to it is probably the best thing to do.
Well, Alanis, I really want to thank you for being here and sharing your story, pointing out the way that childhood instability can shape what feels familiar later on in life, even when it hurts you. You grew up in a home where love and fear existed side by side. Your father was charismatic and funny sometimes, but he was also emotionally unavailable. He was volatile and unpredictable, and that meant that really early on you were learning to live around someone else's moods, to walk on eggshells, and to adjust everything based upon the instability that was going on. And when that is your environment that you grew up in, it can leave you with this deep feeling that something is wrong with you. What gets fought over, what gets withheld, what's getting ignored, what gets made to feel like you're being too much. That feeling can carry on and did carry on for you into your adult relationships. And with that first relationship, the abuse was much more overt. Humiliation, cruelty, gaslighting, physical violence, betrayal. And even with all of that, you were still trying to make sense of, this relationship, trying to save it, trying to understand it, trying to survive it, trying to figure out whether the problem was him or whether the problem was you. And then in the second relationship, it looked a lot different. It was harder to see, harder to name. It was a lot of push and pull, a lot of closeness and distance, and attention and then withdrawal. And the way you were left trying to figure things out, where you stood what changed, why you suddenly felt yourself disappearing again, that was a big, big thing. And that dynamic was at play very hard, and when that dynamic is at play, there's just enough love there. There's just enough stuff going on there to kind of keep you hoping. And then there's enough distance going on that is keeping you doubting. And what stands out with these relationships is, even though that they were different, they're both connected back to the same thing, the older thing that was going on in your early life, that early instability and that sense of being unseen, that feeling of being left in the background, and the fear that maybe you were asking too much just by wanting consistency and care and clarity. So I really appreciate you, Alanis, here being here today and sharing your story of not just what happened, but how it felt from the inside, because this is a story about overt abuse. It's about covert abuse. It's about confusion, worth, visibility, and what it takes to really finally trust your own experience. So I just really want to thank you, Alanis, once again for being here, sharing your story, validating everyone. So just a really big thank you once again. And if you want to be a guest like Alanis was today, go to our website at narcissistapocalypse.com, click on the guest form button, fill out the form, press the submit button. And we also have a support group at our website with Zoom meetings every Wednesday night, Thursday afternoons, and Saturday nights. So click on the support group button at narcissistapocalypse.com. And we also have a new newsletter at our website as well. It's reflective, and you also get a free workbook from every new episode. All of that is at narcissistapocalypse.com. And that is it for today's survivor story. So for myself and Alanis, we hope you have a good night.